The concept of remediation has important implications for something that in literary criticism people call point of view. All media that tell a story have point of view, even paintings, which inevitably or often have some narrative content, and that narrative content carries an implicit point of view along with it. But we're much more used to talking about point of view in relation to the novel. The novel is a form that has developed a whole panoply of techniques for exploring different kinds of point of view, and often a lot of the meaning of a novel comes from the perspective that the novel presents as its point of view. The most familiar point of view, I think, to most readers would be first-person point of view. You can have different kinds of first-person points of view. That's where there's a narrator that is speaking in his or her own voice as an I. A really famous example would be David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. But not all first-person narrations pretend to be autobiographies. They all have to have an autobiographical element, but sometimes the narrator can act more as an observer of the action than as the hero. That is, he's a participant in the action, or he couldn't narrate it, obviously, but he might not be the main character. And that's the point of view that F. Scott Fitzgerald uses so effectively in The Great Gatsby. A first-person narrator always reveals at least two things about the world. That narrator reveals something about himself or herself, sometimes without even realizing it. And, of course, the narrator gives you access to the rest of the story. So there's a double logic to that narration. And it's almost always there in first-person narration. The other main division in written text is omniscient narration. Omniscient is a fairly easy concept to explain, but it actually can be quite nuanced in execution. Omniscience is where the perspective of the narrator has total access to all the characters' minds and to action wherever it's taking place at any time at all. That is full omniscience. And that kind of full omniscience can be of several different sorts. You can have a personified narrator that's working in third person, so it's not an I, it's not a first person narrator, but nonetheless has a little character. Sometimes it's just a tone of voice. Sometimes there'll be an I that omniscient narrator will use with no pretense that that narrator is really a character in the novel. So that's what I mean by a personified omniscient narrator. But you also have, more common in fact, a kind of anonymous omniscience narrator, just a bird's eye view of the action that then zooms in whenever the narrator wants to dramatize a scene, then pulls back out and reflects on the big picture. Is it possible to have a narrator in a video game?
Absolutely. There are some games that literally have narrators,
Yeah.
where the game will open up with someone telling a story. I'm thinking of the God of War franchise. There's this very important component to the cinematic feeling of the game that is totally bound up with the narrator's voice.
Excellent, yeah. Other games that you can think of?
Well, sometimes you have games where the player is essentially the narrator. It's particularly true in sandbox type games where you're controlling all the action.
And in fact, there's a genre on the web of Minecraft games where you just watch YouTube videos of people playing Minecraft and narrating their actions, and they're really mesmerizing. Did you just say you were a fan of those?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of
those. Okay, great. Any other ways in which games can have a narrator?
I'm thinking of cutscenes and how the cutscene sort of it moves the story along on the one hand, and on the other hand, it provides this kind of unifying logic or cohesion, so that the various components of the game that may seem fragmented all come together in these cutscenes.
That's right, but it's a very particular kind of narration, isn't it? Because it doesn't extend over the entirety of the game. It's an interruption. Who or what is a narrator in a film? Now, that's a trick question because films can have different kinds of narrators, but a lot of films don't appear to have a narrator. So when you're watching a film that doesn't have an obvious narrator, who's the implicit or the implied narrator?
The camera.
The camera, yes. Yeah, you know, you see what the camera sees, what the director chooses to show you of the many things the cameras have seen during the filming. So really, it's an entire production team that reveals what you get to see, the editors, post-processing and the like, but the great majority of films have only an implied narrator, and that is the camera. The camera's perspective is the spectator's perspective. Now, this immediately presents a problem for spectators of cinema. It was a problem that directors wrestled with and rapidly overcame at the very dawn of narrative cinema. And that problem was, how do you get spectators to identify with a character that they're watching when they're inhabiting the point of view of the camera? You don't want your spectator identifying with the camera. You know, that's identifying with a piece of technology that you can't even see, except in certain experimental films, is not a very pleasurable experience. So filmmakers had to develop a method of getting spectators to transfer their identification from the camera to the characters on the big screen. They figured out all kinds of clever ways to do it. Some of the most basic are some techniques that we're going to explore by looking at a little film clip, a short film clip from the first movie of The Fellowship of the Ring.
Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it.
In this instance, you hear Cate Blanchett talking in the role of Galadriel about the back history of the ring, the past history that sets up the events that the film will be about. This would ordinarily establish that voiceover as the narrator of the film and maybe even the main character of the film, except this is a prologue to the action of the film, and you can sense that because it's also rolling over the credits. And of course we know that Galadriel doesn't turn out to be the main character of the movie. And this is really an extended passage of exposition. And Peter Jackson handles it pretty well. The graphics, the visuals that her voice rolls over are compelling.
It began with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves, immortal, wisest and fairest of all beings. 7 to the dwarf lords, great miners and craftsmen of the mountain halls. And 9 rings were gifted to the race of men who above all else desire power.
After the exposition, the very next scene has another voiceover, a different character this time, Bilbo, who is composing his memoir.
The 22nd day of September,
year 1400, by Shire reckoning. Bag End, Bagshot Row, Hobbiton, West Farthing. The Shire. Middle Earth. The third age of this world.
This tracking shot going around the corner in Bilbo's house is designed to reveal who the speaker is in the voiceover.
There and back again. A Hobbit's Tale by Bilbo Baggins.
In the third scene in the movie, at last, we get Frodo reading a book. I want you to observe how the director establishes that Frodo is going to be our center of consciousness, the protagonist for a major part of the movie. Not all of it, because there's the Fellowship of the Ring does cut back and forth between Frodo's story and the larger story of the Fellowship. When Frodo lifts his head, you realize that he is hearing the singing of someone that we know is Gandalf, because we've read the book and seen the movie many a time, I suspect, for most viewers. But this is a way for Jackson and the camera to establish the center of consciousness. When he lifts his head, he hears what we, the spectators, the audience, is hearing, and that helps us identify with him, and it cues us right in. His lifting his head with attention is a signal to us to adopt his point of view, not the camera's. When the camera zooms in on his face with his eyes open in a startled fashion, that is a shot that establishes that he is, again, the person, the center of consciousness, the person doing the listening. And the zoom in is a canonical example of the language of cinema for consciousness. As the camera zooms into his face, you understand that he is thinking. And you can see from his expression that he's thinking happy thoughts. He's very excited to go greet Gandalf. Just as Frodo takes off running, the camera switches from the direct shot to what we could call a reverse shot, which is the shot of what Frodo's seeing. And with this gesture, the film has completed the basic act of helping the spectator identify with the central character. So what is the director of this film trying to accomplish with multiple voiceovers? Don?
I think the first voiceover is it might be to establish the sense of an ancestral past, and then when Bilbo's voice comes in, it signals a more of an immediate sense of presence.
Yes.
I also think it's interesting when the camera zooms in on Frodo, we hear birds chirping, so it really kind of situates us in the Shire and brings us to that environment.
Right.